Hi everyone, welcome to Casual Watch Talk. Well, this week we have another interview special for you, and very kindly joined by, it's been a long friend to the show, Dave from Detroit Mint. So welcome to the show, Dave.
Hey guys, thank you.
Awesome. Well, should we kick it off with a wristwatch check, a little bit of an icebreaker here. Chris, do you wanna kick it off? What have you been wearing?
Swapped over to wearing my Bell and Ross GMT. I've got it on the bracelet right now. For the, what did I say? Oh, the longest, shortest week that we just had. So that back to work, that Tuesday that was like 3 Mondays worth of Tuesday, and so I just put on the watch that I needed to get work done for the week. So that's what I've been wearing.
Awesome. And Dave, I'd love to know, what have you been wearing? Is it one of your own or?
Today I've been wearing the new Cobra chronograph that I got all the parts in, and so everything came in. This is the first of the white versions to be fully assembled and ready to go. And you'll see from the back the seagull with the swan neck regulation and 100% regulated watches. So all regulated, assembled. Almost all of them are assembled and ready to go.
I'd love to find out more about that movement later. I'll finish this round off by, I've been wearing my Omega X33. Finally got it back from the repair. So I owned it. Anybody who's not been watching the show, I owned it for 2 days and then had to take it back to where I bought it from. They're very good, Orlando watch company. The alarm works now. And yeah, just getting used to it. It's weird because you think it would be a very high contrasting dial with the LCD. It even looks high contrasting on the video, but sometimes when you look at it, I don't know whether my eye's drawn to the LCD behind more. So it's just getting used to it, I think. But yeah, it's really interesting watch. I'll be doing a full video on it.
I want to hear the sound off. Like I want a Breitling versus Omega alarm sound off.
We will definitely do it. I think the Breitling has it. I think the Breitling could wake the dead, that alarm.
All right. That'll be interesting to hear.
Yeah, it's full on. It's not like your Casio flipping little...
Beep, beep,
Yeah,
beep,
yeah,
beep,
yeah,
beep.
yeah.
Yeah, this thing is like, wake up!
That's great.
Does it play an obnoxious song as well?
No, it doesn't, but that would be cool if it did, or the Omega one. So yeah, I'll definitely do a sound off before, and then I'll do a loom shot as well. But anyway, well, let's get to the main topic of the show. Dave, I'll do a bit of an intro here for you because a couple of years ago now, I did a video on another Detroit watch company. Found out a lot about them, so I made a video because there was definitely some nefarious stuff going on at one time. But anyway, it was the Detroit brand that everyone knew, and I knew there must be other people from Detroit that were making watches, and I found 2 others, the Detroit Watch Company, and then I found yourself, Detroit Mint. And I think I emailed you, asked whether I could review one of the watches. And since then, I've had the pleasure of reviewing 3 of your watches. My favourite, the Bullhead, which we'll talk about shortly. But yeah, Dave, welcome to the show. I'd love to know.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'd love to know, how did you get started in watches? Have you always...
Yeah, I mean, even when I was a teenager, I loved watches, and my dad was a big collector of all things. He was a coin collector, a jewelry collector, and a watch collector. And he always used to talk about, one day you'll inherit your great grandfather's gold watch. That was a big topic of conversation. And when he passed, I inherited my great grandfather's. It was a pocket watch, and it didn't work. It hadn't been serviced in forever. It was just something that had been passed down and had always sat in a jewelry case somewhere. So I had it restored and actually used it a few times, and it's now in my watch box. But and then when my dad passed away, he had a number of his watches from the Vietnam era that I got, and he also had he wore a Seiko on and I actually should be wearing that, but he wore a Seiko on a Native American watch cuff, one of the silver watch tips. I inherited a few of those from him, and a bunch of coins from him, and it got me into collecting those silver watch tips and watch cuffs, and collecting silver jewelry in general. And I was always getting these things with these old wind up watches in them, and they would have like an old Timex in it, or yeah, occasionally something a little nicer, a Benrus 5 or, a 3-star or whatever. And there was some cool watches, but they were sitting on a watch cuff forever and they were in terrible condition. So my idea was I will make my own watch to go into these vintage watch cuffs. Just got into it through Dad's collection, led me into my own thing, started making my own watches. The thought was with the certain ones, it was better to have a quartz watch in so you could get at the batteries. But if you're putting it into a full-on cuff, like a Native American watch cuff it's a solid chunk of silver. Trying to get one of those off to change a battery is almost impossible. So I was like, oh, I need an automatic. And that's where I found the 6105 automatics that you could get homages to the 6105 and just made up my own version of that. And then after I started making those, I was like, I really want it to look and feel more like a vintage watch than a modern recreation. So I changed the bezel, I changed the dial, I changed the bands that they came with were these cheap, crappy bands. Eventually created something that was the Islander that I think, Sam, you saw one of those. It evolved into what's now the Coretta Diver, which is Coretta is the scientific name for a sea turtle. So it became that watch. And then one of my friends from Canada, one of his good friends was looking at it and he was like, Detroit, you should be doing racing chronographs. You should be focused on those. I actually like that idea. I like the concept. So we started making the switch, did the Grand Touring, okay sales on that, wasn't great. And then I saw the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I was like, oh my God, what is that beautiful watch that he's wearing? It's so unique. The bullhead chronograph. Set about the quest to try to make one of those. And man, when that thing came out, and after Sam, especially after you reviewed it, the sales on that took off, and Detroit Mint became a pretty popular micro brand.
I remember you first tried to do the comment you made earlier about making the choice between quartz and mechanical. I remember the Detroit Mint Mac, you made it in a mechanical first, didn't you? And it didn't quite take off. I actually reviewed that watch and I really liked it in mechanical, but I think the audience that watched the film, the problem with those ones that were in the film is they were notoriously, well, you've actually got 2 of them, haven't you? They were notoriously not mechanical.
I have 2 working and 3 not working.
Yeah, they were very hard to find on eBay in working condition, weren't they? So I think when you came back with the quartz version, I think that was just perfect for that watch. I think, I mean, I love the mechanical version, but I think the quartz version, the way that you laid the dial out, and you didn't go for the mecha quartz movement, did you? You put
no.
Yeah, thankfully.
Yeah, I had a few. I actually bought a bunch of mecha quartz to try them, and everything from like the Parnas Daytona to like the original Seikos, when Seiko first had a mecha quartz. They don't even really hardly make a mecha quartz in any of their own watches anymore. But yeah, I tried a bunch of them, and I found if you had to take the crown in and out more than once or twice, it was prone to failure. And if the crown was even slightly misaligned, it didn't work. And I was like, oh boy, that makes me nervous. I'm going to be building these myself. And I don't know, it just made me nervous. I didn't like it. Yeah. And then I got some of the Citizen, their quartz. It's not really a mecha quartz, but it has like a fast flyback on its reset. And they worked great. They were really easy to work with. I was like, oh, this is great. This is simple. It's not a crazy expensive movement. It's super reliable. So worked out good.
You mentioned shop, so you've got a space there that you've been putting stuff together for a couple of years now.
Yeah. So I built on the back of my house. I own an engineering and prototyping business. So I try to do a lot of the finishing work here in my room that I have built on here. It's some guys have like a small little like a bedroom that they have set up to do their watch business in. And I have let's see if I can do this a bit.
Okay. Yeah. Nice little area.
Yeah, it's
Nice little workshop area.
good size. Yeah, a good sized room. It's a couple hundred square feet. So started this out as a nice shop space for myself, and then I have all the tools and equipment and everything here to actually build watches myself. And another storage room for inventory. I have in the Metro Detroit area quite a few shops that I can go to for machine goods, leather goods, denim goods, all that type of stuff. So I've been slowly trying to get more and more of them involved in the process.
It's interesting to calibrate our listeners and our viewers to truly a micro brand. Like that we throw that word around and we're like, oh yeah, they're a micro brand, but you're like, like Christopher Ward is no longer a micro brand. they are giant. And so we kind of have the tendency to throw that around. You're definitely, one the one watchmaker putting stuff together, quality control, it all goes through your hands, which is cool.
Yeah, I'll give you for instance, if you want a gold dial, there's the gold dial with the and it comes like this, right? And this is then going into a gold watch case, right? But it comes out of a little box into my hands, into the case. The leather cuff bracelets that Sam and I talked about in depth of quite a while ago. I'm putting those together from laser cut pieces that I had a company actually set up a laser profile to laser cut the leather so I could get it really exactly the same every time.
Yeah, I remember I sent you it was very important to me when I was reviewing that first mechanical one. I'll leave a link down below that it had to have that cuff. So I got McCullough over at Man Cave Leather too. He just mocked one up and made one for me. I think I sent that over to you to show you, but it has to have a cuff. The Once Upon a Brad Pitt's watch in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is such a character in that film that I was obsessed with it. And obviously, it sounds like a lot of other people have been obsessed with it. Is the gold the best seller out of that?
Yeah, actually, between yourself and Jody, both fell in love with the brushed gold. I think everybody wanted the polished gold because that's a more vintage look. But when people saw the brushed gold, it was a really deep brushing. That's the one that people buy, and it outsells all of my other watches. Probably that gold Mach chronograph sells every week. I sell a handful of those more than I sell all of my other watches combined.
Wow. That one, I was thankful that you let me keep the brushed gold one. I had a friend who was a neighbor in California. He came over and saw it, and he's not a watch guy, but he fell in love with it. So he now wears it. He loves it. He just something about, because I'd been to see the film with him, and it was just something about the romance of the film that you managed to capture so well in the watch, and also because it was quartz, super reliable. You didn't have to worry about those old Citizen ones, which they're an adventure to own one. I understand from what you've been telling me.
Now, are either of you guys into vintage watches? I know you have quite a collection of more modern watches.
I'm not really, but
I think I dabbled a little bit into vintage Seiko. I did a little bit, but it's very fraught with danger, and so it's. I think that. I think that a lot of people felt like they needed that, like in their collection. Like maybe like 2 years ago, I think that was just like you needed a dive watch, you needed an everyday watch, you needed a beater watch, you needed a vintage Omega, or you needed a vintage watch, whatever it was. And yeah, I went in a little bit of it, but stayed away, and certainly, yeah, like I said, fraught with danger. So,
Dave, you're quite into the vintage, aren't you?
So I have. I actually have collected, I have a, the Citizens. I have a vintage Seiko, a real 6105 from 1971. It was a birth year watch for me. When I got my first big business deal in the late 90s, I bought a 94 Rolex. I have some cool old watches. I have like I said, I inherited some of my father's old watches. So I have a Zodiac Seawolf, actually, war-worn Seawolf that came back with him from Vietnam, 1967. So then I have his other watch is Seiko that he bought when he got home. So yeah, I've got quite a few actually. My new thing is with collectibles. I like to collect things that are were never meant to be collectible and have become collectible.
Like ketchup packets.
Yes, anything that was supposed to be just kind of a junk thing and then becomes collectible. Like baseball cards back in the 60s were something you got with a pack of gum, right? But if you get a 1960s baseball card, it's quite valuable. Well, I think in the 1970s and 80s, we got those cheap, crappy little digital watches, and they're making quite a comeback. They're becoming quite popular now. So that's my new thing I'm playing with now are these vintage digital.
Kris and I were joking, I think the other week, about how the 90s has come back in fashion, and I can't remember the 90s being that fashionable. I think I lived through it, and I don't think we thought we were fashionable at the time. Maybe we did.
Maybe maybe if I found like a restored Motorola, the clear Motorola alphanumeric pager. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Then it'd be like,
the clear pager, yes, with it lit up.
I had the Swatch pager watch, and that
was high tech.
It was, and that had a loud alarm. We were joking about the Breitling having a loud alarm. That had a really loud alarm, but I found it a couple of years ago, and it took the full CR2023 battery, and I tried to pull the mechanism out to put the battery back in. The whole thing just fell to bits.
yeah, right. It's made of dust now.
That's the shame about collecting those vintage Swatch watches, that I think the plastic at the time just failed if you didn't store it correctly.
And I've done some stuff with I've done some restoration of old electronics. I can't even imagine like getting into old watch electronics. You probably have to find somebody.
Yeah, so that's funny you mention it. If you don't mind, I'm just going to reach over here and grab one. A hard one to find, and certainly a hard one to fix.
Oh yeah. An original
Pulsar, right?
Yep.
So
that was in a Bond film, wasn't it? Did Roger Moore have that?
It was in a Bond film.
There's a side story to this watch too. Texas Instruments, that created the chip for the clock. Well, they put that chip in other stuff. So there's a whole bunch of YouTube guys that I follow that are fixing up vintage or old test equipment and things like that. And this guy Curious Mark, very famous YouTuber in that area, and it was talking about this chip that was on a board, and then he figured out that it was actually the same exact IC that's in that watch that's telling the test equipment what time it is. and instead of sending it sort of a special code or whatever in binary to read the time, it is literally just the computer is just pressing, doing the button presses in logic.
It's not like a solid state actual movement of a mechanical piece. Yeah. So you mentioned Bond watches. This is the other. This way.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Little Roger Moore.
The
Seiko. This is the one that famously had the ticker tape pop out of it. It said 007, report to HQ immediately.
Yeah. Well, and then of course there's the TV watch, isn't there, from Octopussy? That's
yes.
I occasionally do a cheeky little look on eBay, and they're definitely creeping up in price. There's a guy on YouTube who's, I'll leave a link to the video down below, where he managed to get a transceiver to talk to it, so he actually could film the video and put his own face on he did the intro to his YouTube video on the Seiko watch.
Oh wow.
Phenomenal that he did it. So he broadcast. It was like a short broadcast that he broadcast a TV signal to it, because I think
wow,
local broadcast. That's cool.
Let's talk about, Dave. You came on as well for talking about your new collection as well. So you were telling me the other day that you've been really interested in historical racing watches and the time where most race drivers, the watch was pivotal to them timing their laps and things like that.
I'm a big fan of movie watches, and in Ford versus Ferrari, Carroll Shelby's character, played by Matt Damon, wears a white and black Panda. I believe it's one of the original Heuer racing chronographs. It was before the Carrera. It was a Heuer, but what it was unique with it was that it had, instead of a tachymeter around the outside, it had 1/100th of a minute, so you could time your lap times. Because when you're timing a lap time, you're not going to sit there and do a tachymeter calculation, right? You need to know that you ran that lap in 4 minutes and 32 100ths of a minute, 4.32 minutes, right? So the watch actually had 1/100th of a minute markers around the outside.
I don't think I've seen that before.
Exactly. I hadn't either. I'm like, that's odd and unique. So I found one of those Heuers, and I couldn't find one to buy it, but I found a few pictures of it, and I'm like, that has a different
old rallies, because math, doing math on paper is hard. Old rallies would do 100th of a minute. So they wouldn't do seconds, they would do hundredths of a minute. So there's a bunch of modern clocks that will actually do hundreds of a minute still. And so it's fascinating when you see them ticking away and you're like, wait, it says 61, 62, 63, 64. And you're like, what is going on? And it's ticking a little faster, obviously. Yeah, it shows off, how many in divisions. So
it has, as you fire off the chronograph, it's on the rehole ring or the chapter ring, whichever you prefer to call it. It's timing in 100ths of a minute. So as you're doing your lap timing, it's doing that. And I found it unique, and I loved the look of that watch. And then I was like, okay, how can I make something very similar to that in a modern watch that would actually be reliable and not crazy expensive? One of the more popular modern manual wind chronographs is the Seagull, which is a beautiful movement. I found that, and then the challenge was, if I'm going to buy those, I worry about their accuracy and about the quality and reliability.
I've heard there's like 4 different companies that make them, and then and it's questionable whether you get one that's decent, or who made the original one. Yes, the movement itself is a copy of a copy of a copy, but you still want to, if you're going to be reselling them, you have to have some assurance that the vendor that you're picking there.
So it's I thought, so Seagull isn't one company. I know it's the old Venus movement originally, but I didn't know that, Chris. I thought they were all made by Seagull was the manufacturer.
They're being made by a couple of different companies, from what I understand. Maybe Dave knows more.
So Seagull as a brand makes their own for the Seagull, the Chinese Army.
The 1969.
Yeah, the 69. They make one, but then there's a bunch of ripoffs of that out there. And there is a mechanical chronograph that's it's called a Seagull 19 or something like that, but it's not actually made by Seagull. So you do have to get an actual Seagull, and then you need to have them 100% checked and inspected to make sure that they're keeping great time and everything. When fully wound, they're 100% right on the money. So all of mine go across the time grapher. They get checked prior to me getting. I inspect them again when I get them. So because I'm getting them shipped in from. The Seagulls come in from China. Citizens come in from Japan.
I was just watching something where people were saying that so that movement is. They're like, oh, well, you might not be able to service that movement. So maybe like a question of like serviceability, but also it's not that expensive of a mechanical movement as far as a chronograph is concerned. So
no, so you can. Well, number one, if like a Detroit Mint watch, we service all of them. I service them myself. If you break one of these watches, part of our warranty is for the life of the watch. If it needs to be fixed or repaired or serviced, it's a $75 maximum charge. So, you have 30 days to get the watch. And if you don't like it, or buyer's remorse, whatever, send it back, no questions asked. 90 days, if you find something wrong with it, like something comes loose or whatever, any craftsmanship defect or anything like that, then you can return it. But then after that, it goes into its service life. And if you need it serviced or you want it repaired or something breaks, just send it back. And, I have the parts for it here. I keep them in stock, so I can fix it myself. Or if it's not worth fixing, I'll just send you a new one, and it's $75.
You mentioned about that movement that it had a gooseneck regulation. Now, I thought that was is it the STP movements that Fossil make? They bought that company. I thought that was a company-specific regulation system, but I'm interested to know about how it works and how do you find it?
Gooseneck regulator is now offered from Seagull to anyone that wants to pay for it. But the only reason to pay for it is if you're actually going to regulate the watches. You can just put it on there and slap it on there. It's just a means of easily adjusting. Like, if you adjust the regulation on a watch, there's typically a little lever on the balance wheel, and you can move that up or down to try and slow it down or speed it up. But if you touch those things, it jumps a lot.
Yeah, Kris and I have done videos on it. Yeah.
Big difference. So with the gooseneck regulator, there's a screw, and then there's a gooseneck, like a spring that goes onto that little, kind of pushes that little mark, like a tenth of a millimeter with every turn. So it's very microscopic adjustment with the turn of a screwdriver. So all of my watches were regulated at the factory before they shipped them to me. So I know that every one of them is running perfectly prior to shipment, and then of course in shipment they're going to adjust a little bit.
So you find it a lot easier to get that precise sort of regulation with them?
Yeah, I mean, it's really precise. I mean, you can get them down to, single digits for, seconds per day of adjustment. I mean, it's, they'll be within 6 seconds per day, 4 seconds a day. I mean, it's a mechanical watch, right? So it's you still have to wind it every day.
And I'm amazed. I've just flash up the website for a second. I'm amazed that your introductory price is $400 for a mechanical chronograph. Currently on this is the pre-order price, of course.
Yeah. So we're talking, the Seagull movement, even with the full regulation, is still under $100 for me to buy the movement in massive quantities, right? And then, the cases, sapphire crystals, these come with a very nice leather band and with a milled clasp. You get up there, and we have no overhead, right? It's me and a couple of people that help me sell stuff, and promotions that I do. I don't have a ton of overhead, so I don't have to. My watch versus the Hamilton, they make a very similar watch. It's a very similar watch.
And I would also encourage people that fell in love with the other Detroit brand because they have a love for Detroit, that there is other brands out there at very reasonable prices from people that also have an affinity for Detroit.
Yes, and even our other brand in Detroit, the Detroit Watch Company, they make some very high-end luxury watches with high-end, highly regulated Swiss chronometer grade movements. I mean, those things are stunning, but I don't sell watches to in the thousands of dollar range. I sell watches to, I always say, I sell watches to the mechanics, not the auto executives.
Oh, that's good. That's a little marketing there. That's good.
Yeah, I like mine to be able to go out and do work with mine. Especially the Mach. I take mine out and I work on my car. I work on my boat with that watch on all the time.
Looking to the future now, are you going to be streamlining the entire collection to be racing inspired watches, or are you going to have another go at the dive watch scene? So
with the dive watches that I have, I've been looking at, my love for these vintage watches, my collection of racing watch books, and A Man and His Watch, some of these books, the classics. What I've seen was the divers in the 70s got tweaked into being rally watches, right? The rally divers of the 1970s were a way for Seiko, for instance, to have a play on the popularity of the race car driving, the wide world of sports race car scene and the F1 scene. So I will be making a rally version of our dive watch, and then I will be doing an automatic version of the mock called the Mechanic. There will be a full automatic version.
Oh, right.
So that one is taking a bit to develop because a fully automatic chronograph packed into a bullhead orientation is very thick.
Yeah.
When you move that thing over and have to place it above the lugs, you think of the crown has to be above the lug. That thing ends up being, quite thick. So I talked to a bunch of movement manufacturers all over the globe trying to figure out something. And I was able to find a movement maker who could kind of adjust their movement to make I would say the movement similar to a 7750 clones that are out there. It had to be tweaked a little bit to get the orientation. And then I wanted 2 dials instead of 3 because I wanted it to be symmetrical. And all of the 775 zeros that I saw, they were all oriented the wrong direction.
Right. Yeah. They're like out to the left or one side.
Yeah. And if I see a 24-hour subdial on a chronograph ever again, it just makes my skin crawl.
So Dave, we've interviewed a number of micro brands, and I talk to micro brand owners all the time. A lot of them got a start on Kickstarter, and some have some good success with that, but you necessarily didn't have a good, with the original Mac, the mechanical one, you tried it on Kickstarter. I think that was your first time, wasn't it? And it didn't go quite as I'd expected it to, or you'd expected it to go. What was the story there?
Yeah, so I think there was a couple of things about the Detroit Mint brand. We had used the Old English, which is kind of symbolic of Detroit. A lot of people in Detroit use the Old English text on our things. And a lot of people hate it. Surprisingly, I didn't realize that. A lot of people associate it with more of a Latin gang thing than they do a Detroit thing. I had no idea about that. That was part of it. And then I think in general, you don't see a lot of the homemade videos on Kickstarter anymore. They're all very polished, very professionally created promotional videos. And I just didn't want to do that. I was like, here's the watch, here's what it is. This is why I did it. This is why I love it, why I think it's cool. And some people jumped at it right away, and other people were like, I don't like that video. I don't like the text on the watch. Why wouldn't you just, for that amount of money, why wouldn't you just buy an original Citizen? There was a lot of negative comments that came back, and I was like, oh wow, so this is the feedback was pretty harsh. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to think about some of these things. There's some legit feedback. So I took a step back, and it didn't fly. It got about halfway to its target. And I was like, okay, well, if I could get that many people interested in the watch, but there were certain things about it that they didn't like, could I generate enough pre-sales on my own website to get some cash flow? And then I ended up just financing it myself. I own a few businesses, so I had the means to do that. Wouldn't recommend other people attempting that with a totally new watch that you're designing yourself, because you can get yourself into some debt, pretty quickly. But so I ended up partially financing it myself and partially just starting my own website and getting my own pre-orders on my own website. And I do think that it's become more of a marketing ploy for like bigger watchmakers. I don't understand why they are doing Kickstarter other than it's just.
Yeah, it's the captive audience of I have to be a part of the fear of missing out captive audience for sure.
Yeah, and plus it's a great market research tool, isn't it, to see whether a new mix of, a new type of watch or a new style of watch is going to get traction, because other than, I guess, making the prototype, it's probably a cheaper way than doing, some kind of audience survey or...
And you get the money up front. So you have all the money up front. You basically, your marketing, your development team is... you can do a bunch of stretch goals that'll change a bunch of little things, whatever. But yeah, if it flies on Kickstarter, then you can really turn it. So it's interesting.
We're just coming to the end of the global pandemic, and we know that the pre-owned watch industry went absolutely insane. How did it affect your business the last year?
I would say because of the pandemic, I was actually able to pay my bills with my watch sales. Whereas in the auto industry, I get paid based on the number of parts being sold. Well, when they shut the factories down, nobody was buying parts anymore. So my income from my regular job went from, a good monthly salary to zero. But my sale of watches went from, a couple $100 a month to several thousand. And it was 10 times more, actually. So last Christmas, I mean, it was crazy how many watches. I was building 60 watches a day for a while. That was my job.
Well, then did you struggle? Did it have a knock-on effect that you struggled to get the parts, or had you sort of accounted for that?
Luckily, I think I had sourced enough of these. I chose a movement that was easy to get. And I don't think a lot of people use the OS, the Citizen OS movement. So I think there was a lot of them available. I bought a bunch of them, and then I bought a bunch more when I shortly after your review came out, and I saw the uptick, and I knew Jody was doing a review, and with his very, very large fan base and follower base, I was expecting a lot. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get enough of the movements in, get enough of the watch heads in different variants, and be able to put them together. And I planned ahead. I bought in significant volume going into December, and I was able to get through December and through the first 6 months of this year. And it really, really took off from, I would say, from fall of last year to spring of this year, when the pandemic was in the worst part of the second wave. Watch sales were spectacular. And as long as you planned your inventory, I guess to Sam's point, as long as you planned your inventory correctly, you could get it. But now the inventory is even more challenged now. So it's not been easy, like getting the parts for the Cobras. It was challenging. It took a lot longer than it did years ago to do it.
And you had set up for e-commerce because of your Kickstarter. So that was very fortunate. That worked out.
Yeah. So I actually developed my own website. I basically do everything myself. And then if I need help with sales, or I need help with fixing something, I'll reach out to a professional in a specific industry. But I try to do everything myself first. So I designed my website. I do my packaging. I do all the quality inspections. I build the watches. So it's literally just me, unless I need help with something, and then I reach out to somebody else. So then I had the website set up, and I had an eBay store that was actually successful from my days of selling the silver Native American stuff and things. It was quite successful from that already. So yeah, then I added the website, and that really took off. And then this year, we're actually working on updating the website to something a little bit more Detroit themed, and it'll be like a total revamp of the brand here shortly.
Yeah, Sam and I had mentioned kind of during when it was all happening, we were thinking that the larger companies that weren't set up to do direct to consumer, that weren't set up to do e-commerce, were really going to take a hit, and it does look like. I mean, I was looking at some numbers of the whole Swiss watch industry being down about like 20%. And definitely, and definitely could anybody who was online and could do online direct to consumer sales, and we guessed that microbrands would be okay. So interesting direct feedback there.
And I wonder if those guys, if they had seen from this pandemic situation the value of doing direct to consumer sales and marketing, where, like Sam mentioned, Yema does very well with direct to consumer marketing. But I do feel that at this point in time, maybe the AD, having ADs doing all of your authorized dealers networks and being in malls and being all of that type of stuff, these highly expensive jewelry stores selling your watches, I just don't know if there's a ton of future in some of that, in some brands.
And interesting, as a guy from Detroit, where the auto industry is literally set up like that. And so direct to consumer sales for autos are like shunned or, very difficult to get around. So
it's funny because today I was at lunch in Detroit, and we were talking about the new electric vehicles and stuff that are coming out, especially out of Ford. The guy I was having lunch with was a manager at Ford, and we were speaking about what's Ford going to do with all these dealerships when direct marketing starts happening, right? You start buying your car online, you're not going to need to go to a dealership. But what you are going to need to go to the dealership for is, as you're driving down the highway from Detroit to Florida, if I'm driving to Orlando, for instance, you're not going to have an electronic charging port at every stop. But I guarantee you there's a Ford dealer at every major city. Every town has a Ford dealership in it that you can pull over, charge your car, go in, grab a cup of coffee, and look at the new model.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in finding out more about the new Cobra, I'll leave a link to the pre-order in the description down below. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we really appreciate you watching and listening, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk. Thanks, guys. Bye.